Modern classics. What are they? How do I define them? We're going to chat all about that today, and I'm going to share some modern classics from my shelf that I think are a little bit more under the radar than not. So stay tuned. Hello book friends, I'm Jen and welcome to my reading life. Today it is all about modern classics. I have had a number of requests from viewers to talk about some of my favorite modern classics. And when I was pulling books off the shelf, I was thinking about what it is that makes a book a modern classic. And for me, first off, when I hear the term classic, to me, that is a book that has withstood the test of time. And I think often if you go looking at what the definition of a classic is, that is one of the things that most people will say describes a classic, a book that's withstood the test of time, something that people are still reading today because they find some sort of relevance in it. It still is enjoyable to read. It still tells us something about human nature, about the world we live in, and there is still value in that today. And for modern classics, they're definitely still classics, books that have withstood the test of time. But for the time period for modern classics, for me, I would say the sweet spot is really from after the turn of the 20th century up through about the 1960s or maybe 1970s. I think we could even make a case that there are some books from the 1980s and maybe the 90s that are edging into that modern classics category now. But of the books that I have picked to share with you today, I think all of them were written, I think between about the 1920s and the 1960s. I definitely don't have anything that was written after, I believe 1964 is the most recent book. Again, that's just my personal definition of a modern classic. If you have a different definition, if you use a different time range for modern classic, I think that's wonderful. I think you can define it however you'd like, and there is certainly no hard and fast rule for what makes a book a modern classic. But if it's something that you still enjoy reading, then why not call it a modern classic? But without further ado, let's just jump right into the books. I have a stack here, I think of about 10 or 11 books that I'm going to share today. And actually the first one I'm going to start with is the most recently published book. And this was published in 1964. And that is Up the Down Staircase by Belle Kaufman. I have mentioned this book before. It is a book that I have read and loved within the past couple of years. And it is about a teacher in a New York City public school I think it takes place during the late 1950s. And we follow, I think, a very loosely fictionalized version of Belle Kaufman. She did work in the New York City public schools. And so this is her fictionalized account of that experience. And our main character in this is Sylvia Barrett. She works in room 304 at Calvin Coolidge High School. And through a series of memorandums, letters, different conversations, we learn all about what happens to Miss Barrett throughout the course of one school year. And as I've mentioned before, I do love books about teachers that are set in schools. And I love the format of this. It feels very light and accessible and still talks about teaching and about the importance of teaching in a serious way. So I think she does a really good job of balancing both the lightness and the heaviness of that subject. It's wonderful. I love this vintage edition that I found, and I'll definitely be rereading this at some point. Like I said, the format for this is really fun, and there are she has drawings and there are, like I said, memorandums, and she's also got intra-school communications, so messages between teachers, messages from the principal. And even though that very much sets it in a certain period in time, I think it still holds value and resonance, and the humor in this still translates to today. The next modern classic I have to share was published in 1955, and that is Bonjour Tristesse by Françoise Sagan. And this is a French novella, and it is one that I read back when I was in my late teens, early 20s, and absolutely loved it. It is a bit of a coming of age, sexual awakening of this young girl, and Françoise Sagan wrote this when I believe she was 18. Well, it was published when she was 18. I think she wrote it when she was 16 or 17. And it is just wonderful. We follow in this Cecile, and she's 17, and she is joining her father at a villa that they're renting outside of Paris for the summer, and he's there with his, I think she's his fiance, his mistress. And then Cecile's late mother's best friend comes to stay, and suddenly there's a bit of a love triangle happening. All the while, Cecile is also having a bit of her own romantic liaison with a boy that she has met. And between the two of them, well, really Cecile is the instigator, but she puts into motion a plan to sort of mess up what is going on between the adults in her life. And yeah, some interesting things happen. This book has a bit of a dark side. I think it does sort of evoke a little bit of the angst of being a teenager and sort of what an emotional time that is. But I really love books translated from the French. Something about them. There is a bit of a sparseness to French novel writing that I really like. I just enjoy how novels are put together when they're written in French. And kind of in the same way, I like books that have been translated from the Japanese. It's not the same kind of sparseness, but they have kind of that same tone to them. And what is the word I'm looking for here? It's escaping me at the moment. I think novels, both written in French and in Japanese, are able to evoke a lot of emotion without a lot of words, and I really do enjoy that. So I highly recommend Bonjour Tristesse, especially if you enjoy coming of age novels, and if you're looking for a good summer read, this is the perfect time to read this one. My next modern classic is another very slim little novella, which I have spoken about before on my channel, and that is Address Unknown by Katherine Cressman Taylor. And this was a book that I picked this up on a whim, and I was completely blown away by it. I can't tell you how much of a punch this tiny little book packs. It is set in 1932, right as Hitler is coming into power, and it is about two German friends. One is in San Francisco, and then the other has returned to Germany, and they're both Jewish. And when you think about when this was first written, which was 1938, or first published at least in 1938, it is amazing the insight that Katherine Cressman Taylor had into Nazism and fascism and what that was going to do to the world. I mean, very prescient, I think, and I highly recommend this one. You can read this book in one sitting, and it's epistolary, so it's written as letters between the friends, and it's just wonderful and really, really powerful. I can't recommend it enough. Moving on from some very slim novellas to a very chunky book, and that is South Riding by Winifred Holtby. This was originally published in 1936, and again, we follow another school teacher in this one, though South Riding really is about a community, though there is a teacher Sarah Burton. She comes back to be the headmistress at the local school. And so we sort of follow what happens to Sarah, but also what is going on with the people in the community as well. I would say, you know, I'm reading Middlemarch right now, and I think Middlemarch is probably the best comparison I have to South Riding, where we're getting like a very large overview of the town. And there's other classics that can be compared to this as well, where we're looking sort of at society as a whole. I mean, Edith Wharton does that really well. I think Anthony Trollope would probably fall in that category, even Dickens novels. But I found this to be incredibly readable, even though it is quite long and quite chunky. It is such a wonderful story, and I was very invested in all of the characters and in Sarah Burton. And it's funny, this is one of the few books where I have seen the miniseries before I read the book, and I really love the miniseries too. So if you haven't seen that, but you've read South Riding, I highly recommend it. I'm actually going to rewatch it myself very soon. I read this last summer and I thoroughly enjoyed it. And if you are looking for something to really sink your teeth into this summer or fall, I definitely recommend this one. The next modern classic that I have to share is one that had been on my TBR for so many years, and I don't know why it took me so long to pick it up, but I read it last fall, and it was just such a delight, and that is Cold Comfort Farm by Stella Gibbons. I love this cover with all the characters in the family on it. It's just fantastic. And this book is so funny. Published first in 1938. In this novel, we follow Flora Post. She has come to Cold Comfort Farm to move in with her family, the Stark Adders, whom she's never met, and she has recently become an orphan, and so she needs to be taken in by family because she has nowhere else to go. And then it's all about the antics that happen once Flora arrives. Flora has just a wonderful spirit about her, and she really engenders quite a bit of change at the farm in some really wonderful ways. And it is laugh out loud funny and so charming, and I absolutely loved this. It is a new favorite of mine, and I can't wait to reread it. And I probably won't wait that long to do it because I can just still feel that feeling of being immersed in this book, and it was so lovely. My next modern classic is another epistolary novel, and you know how I love a good epistolary novel, and this is one where I rarely hear it talked about, but I still would qualify this as a modern classic because I do think it holds up really well over time, and that is Business as Usual by Jane Oliver and Anne Stafford. And this is the story of Hilary Fane, and she is from Edinburgh. She is fresh out of college, and she is going to be spending a year in London before she gets married, and she is going to take a job and, you know, just sort of have a little bit of an adventure before she settles down to married life. And her fiance isn't really that thrilled about it, but she's doing it anyway. And she gets a job at Everyman's, which is a thinly disguised Selfridges in the department store. And she sort of moves herself up the rank slightly because she's not very equipped to handle certain jobs. And so then, but she amazingly just keeps landing on her feet and getting herself in better and better positions. And it's just all about what happens to her during this year. And it's written in letters home, letters to her fiance. And it's really charming and wonderful. And I thoroughly enjoyed reading this very light account of one woman's life in London in 1933, and I definitely recommend this. Then next up, we have a modern classic, which is the only mystery that I have in this stack. The reason this is the only mystery on the list is that I feel like mystery authors writing in the early to mid 20th century are so popular, so well known, and the ones that aren't don't hold up quite as well. But this mystery is by a very well-known author, and you've probably heard of this one, but I feel like not a lot of people have read this, and that is Miss Pym Disposes by Josephine Tey. This is yet another book set in a school. I definitely have an affinity for school stories. And in this, Lucy Pym, she's a psychologist. She is guest lecturing at a physical training college. And the term is almost over, and Miss Pym discovers that there's a girl who's going to cheat on one of her exams, and she sort of stops that from happening. And then there is another crime that happens, and you sort of go along with figuring out sort of what has happened and what's gone on. And I don't want to say any more than that. This is very much a psychological mystery. This isn't your typical whodunit. Like you enter within the first chapter or two, somebody dies, and then we're going to figure out what happened. This is not that kind of book, not that kind of mystery. But I really think it is so, so well done. And Miss Pym is a fantastic character. I also really loved all of the different girls depicted who are part of this, physical training college, which I never really heard of. I didn't really have a full grasp of what that was, but you definitely get a sense for it as we go along in the story. And I really, really enjoyed this, and I am looking forward to reading more Josephine Tey. I think she tends to be a bit more of a psychological mystery writer than just a strict whodunit, and I think this is a wonderful example of her writing, and I highly recommend. And if I didn't say, this was published originally in 1948. The next book that I have on my modern classics list is one that I just read back in December and completely fell in love with. And now I want to read every single book that this author has written, and that is in this series. And that is High Rising by Angela Thurkel. I thoroughly loved this. It reminded me a lot of D.E. Stevenson, and what I love about D.E. Stevenson, that sort of lightness to the writing style, very slice of life. We are following a woman's life, Laura Morland. She's a novelist, and she and her son head off to spend Christmas at High Rising. This is her country home, and it's just sort of all about what happens while they are there. I think Angela Thurkel really draws her characters so vividly. She writes women really wonderfully. This is witty and a laugh out loud funny at points, and I just was completely immersed in the world that she has created here. And this is the first in her Barsetshire Chronicles, which she has taken from Anthony Trollope. They are sort of set in the same region, though these books don't have anything to do with Trollope's novels. And after reading this, I purchased like the next 5 or 6 in the series because I just want to keep reading them all. And I am planning to read Wild Strawberries, which is the next one up, hopefully in the next few weeks. I also read Christmas at High Rising, which is sort of a series of connected short stories with the same characters from High Rising, and I thoroughly enjoyed that as well. And I'm a huge Angela Thurkel fan now, and I can't wait to read more. The next modern classic I am going to talk about is one that I have mentioned before, but it is worth mentioning again, and that is Appointment with Venus by Gerard Tickle. And I read this a couple of summers ago, and it is so good. I was absolutely surprised. I'm just going to read you the top little synopsis here. It says, "It is 1940, the world is at war, and all that stands between England and Nazi-occupied Europe is the tiny, fictitious Channel Island of Armorel. Controlled by German soldiers, but still home to loyal villagers, a pacifist painter, and a pedigree Guernsey cow named Venus." And then the War Office in London hatches a plan to liberate Venus from the Channel Islands and send her back to England. And this is the story of how they go about doing that. And You wouldn't think that a story about rescuing a cow would be such a page turner, and yet this absolutely is. This was published in 1951, and I devoured this when I read it. I could not put it down. And Manderley Press, which has republished this, they've republished some really lovely books, and I am hoping to get my hands on more of their publications soon, but I cannot recommend this one enough. Such a fun read, perfect for summer. If you're ever in a reading slump, this was a book that got me out of a reading slump, and that is really high praise in my book, and I will definitely read it again at some point because I really, really enjoyed it. And then I have one final book, which I just realized is actually published a little bit outside of my modern classics parameter. This was published in 1972, but I still think it qualifies as a modern classic, at least to me. The way it's written, I think it just holds up really, really well. It's been quite a while since I've read this one, so my recollection of the plot of it is perhaps a little bit hazy at this point in time, but that book is To Serve Them All My Days by R.F. Delderfield, and this book it's pretty hefty. This clocks in at, how many pages? 638 pages. It's a pretty chunky read, and it does happen to be another book set in a school. Clearly, there is a theme to the modern classics that I enjoy reading. If you have any others that are set in schools or are about teachers, please let me know because I will definitely want to read them. But in this, we follow David Powlett Jones. He's a Welsh miner's son, and he's invalided home from France during World War I. And then at a remote English public school in Devon, he decides to temporarily try his hand at teaching. And then he sort of ends up staying there for another 25 years or so. And it says, he has survived unexpected personal tragedies, academic intrigues, and professional rivalries to become the compassionate, judicious, beloved headmaster of Bamfield School, who one day finds himself interviewing an earnest, edgy young man recently invalided out of World War II. So a bit of a full circle moment happening there. And I believe this is my Masterpiece Theater edition, and this was made into, I believe, a mini-series, or TV series, and I really should track that down. I actually want to reread this. It is chunky, but it's very readable, and I absolutely loved this when I read it. So if you're looking for a book to really get immersed in a wonderful story filled with lots of characters, this is the place to go. And that is it for some of the perhaps more under the radar modern classic picks. And these are all books that I have really loved and will definitely read again in the future. And I would love to hear from you in the comments. Have you read any of these books, or did you discover something new here today that you never heard of but now want to read? Let's chat down in the comments and tell me, what do you think is a modern classic? And what are some of your favorite modern classics? Any that are maybe also a little bit off the radar? I would love to hear about those as well. I'm always looking to add books to my ever-expanding TBR. If you could give this video a like and hit that subscribe button if you aren't already subscribed, that would be wonderful. And thank you, as always, for watching. I really, really appreciate you being here, and I'll be back with another video very soon. Bye.